recording. Again, this meeting is being recorded, just an FYI. And so it's nice to meet everyone. And so Joanne, I will hand it off to you and we'll go ahead and get started. Thanks, Joanne.
Thank you, Chad. And good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for being with us. I'm really glad to have the opportunity to talk to you today about the scoring for the Wyoming BEAD sub-grantee selection process, which really means just how are the BEAD grant applications going to be scored as part of that process. For those of you who were able to join us when we did the last technical assistance webinar for the BEAD program, you will recall that we talked pretty extensively about how the subgrantee selection process is designed, how decisions will be made, the role of reference pricing, and grant areas. And scoring is the next topic, and these things are very intimately connected to each other. So I want to commend to you the recorded version of the last webinar. If you didn't get a chance to attend it, it really is very relevant to what we're going to be talking about today. And I hope you get a chance to take a look at that and see how it relates to what we're discussing today. That is all available to you through the Wyoming Broadband Office website. And this will as well. The recording of today's event will as well. So I want to thank Chad also for the opportunity to present this information and for the guidance on it. What we will do also is toward the end of the hour, questions posed in the chat. Chad will take over the conversation and pose those questions as necessary, fielding them to me or others. And we look forward to the opportunity to answer those. If we don't have sufficient time, those will also all be answered in writing in the frequently asked questions. But what we're talking about specifically for the next 55 minutes or so is scoring for BEAD. As I said, last time we all met to talk about the BEAD program and how it is designed and how it will be executed. All of this is articulated. Everything we're going to talk about today is written out in considerable detail in the initial proposal, volume 2, that the state of Wyoming wrote to the federal government. That is the initial proposal for how the BEAD program would be conducted. Is in the second volume of the initial proposal, and that document is publicly available as approved by the federal government. And the section 2.42 is the section that deals in detail with scoring. Other parts of section 2.4 deal in detail with the other topics around the design of the program. And I am going to share with you today through slides how the scoring works, but I want to commend to you that document, Initial Proposal Volume 2, because it is the Bible for how the Wyoming Broadband Office will run this program, what it will be required to do under the federal rules, which is to comply with the terms and the rules that it set out itself in that initial proposal. And so that initial proposal, volume 2, is the most valuable document, the most useful document you can have as a reference point for how to understand what is coming, how to understand how you will be scored, how your application will be reviewed, what negotiations will look like, and what the decision process will look like. There is nothing more valuable to you than that document and understanding what your opportunity is and what you should be doing to prepare for that opportunity when it comes to BEAD in Wyoming. All right, I say that over and over again because it is so important, but if I say it again, you'll forgive me for exactly that reason. So what we're going to do today in looking at the scoring is I am going to show you the overview, the scoring rubric as NTIA, the federal agency that oversees BEAD, as they call it, the overall scoring rubric. And then we'll do more of a deep dive into each of the scoring criteria. But there are two scoring rubrics in the initial proposal, Volume 2. The first one is for priority projects, which, as you'll recall from the last time we met, priority is the language that NTIA uses to refer to end-to-end fiber projects. Under federal rules, those are the priority, and wherever affordable and viable, those projects have to be funded. So we'll look at the scoring rubric for priority projects for end-to-end fiber, looking first at the primary criteria and then at the secondary criteria. The primary criteria are the ones that are mandated by the federal rules. They are for a minimum of 75% of the scoring under the federal rules. And then there are secondary criteria, some of which are mandated by federal rules and some of which were discretionary. The state could propose them as they chose to, subject to federal approval. Then when we are done looking at the rubric and the details for priority projects, we'll look at the same for non-priority. And non-priority here really just means other technologies that are not end-to-end fiber, but still meet NTIA's definition of reliable broadband service. All those definitions, by the way, are in the presentation deck and the webinar from last time. So if you'd like to take another look at those, that deck and that webinar, which is archived on the website, will be very helpful. So non-priority means reliable broadband service, not end-to-end fiber, but all other forms of reliable broadband service. And in NTIA's framework, that effectively means hybrid fiber coaxial cable, licensed fixed wireless, hybrid licensed and unlicensed fixed wireless, and DSL in some cases if it meets the appropriate criteria. And again, on non-priority, we will look at the primary criteria, which is 75% of all scoring. Those are the criteria that were mandatory, that NTIA required, and then the secondary criteria, which were partially mandatory, required by NTIA, and partially could be proposed by the state and then accepted by the federal government or tweaked by the federal government. We'll look at all of that, and I'll share which ones were required by the federal government and which ones were the choice of the state. So let's start with the priority projects, that is end-to-end fiber. And this is the rubric. This is right out of the Wyoming Broadband Office's BEAD Initial Proposal, Volume 2, scoring rubric for priority projects. And what you see up here at the top are the primary criteria, which under NTIA's rules have to be these three things: minimal BEAD program outlay, affordability, and fair labor practices. And under NTIA's rules, these three added up had to be equal to or greater than 75% of all scoring. Now, the state got to determine what the relative weight of these different criteria would be. And what you see here is the way that the State Broadband Office proposed that, with 50 points, meaning half of all total possible points for minimal BEAD program outlay, 15 points for affordability, and 10 for fair labor practices. The secondary criterion that was mandatory, required by NTIA, is speed to deployment. And there, the federal rules were that the state could assign as many points as it wanted, so long as it was not equal to or more than any individual primary criterion. So as you can see, speed to deployment is a very high priority for Wyoming, and the speed to deployment criterion here has 9 points, the highest number possible, given that it could not be equal to or greater than any of the primary criteria in total points. And then in addition to that, there were three other criteria that the state added that were not mandated by the federal government: unserved broadband serviceable locations, natural hazard risk mitigation, and local and tribal government coordination. I'll talk about each of these individually in detail in a moment, but you can see there that adds up to 100%. It's pretty evident here as you're thinking about how to maximize points and craft your grant program where the greatest number of points are. I'm not going to say anything that is really obvious, but here you have the summary. This is the full rubric of how every priority, that is end-to-end grant application, will be scored by the state under the rules in the initial proposal, volume 2. After we look at all of these in detail, we'll look at the scoring rubric for other broadband, for other reliable broadband service projects. That is, projects that meet the definition of reliable broadband service but are not end-to-end fiber. And what you'll see is that the differences are actually relatively modest. There is just an additional secondary criterion that was required by NTIA around technology factors. We'll come to that in a few minutes, but this is close to consistent with the other scoring rubric, but for the moment, this is only about fiber. Let's look at each of these different criteria now in turn in some detail. Starting with the first and the one that has the largest number of points associated with it, half of all points for scoring of end-to-end fiber projects will be for minimal BEAD program outlay per project. And minimal BEAD program outlay is a jargony federal term for saying, what does it cost? And what the Wyoming Broadband Office has put into its initial proposal, volume 2, and the means by which it will score each of these applications is based on the relationship between the dollar figure that is proposed in the application by the applicant, the relationship between that dollar figure and the benchmark figure that is being developed currently by the Broadband Office. As you'll recall from our last webinar, the benchmarks are being developed using the methodology that you see quoted here. This is a direct quote from the initial proposal, volume 2. Benchmark will be calculated using data from CostQuest Associates as a starting point and with some other data inputs in order to determine a number that the Broadband Office thinks may be viable for each of the grant areas in light of the need to provide funding to get service to every eligible location in the state, every unserved and underserved location within a finite budget. The finite budget is the number of dollars allocated by NTIA as part of the BEAD program. So the benchmark numbers are being calculated right now. They will be released with all of the grant materials and the project area design, the project area units, which are based largely on census block groups and partial census block groups and designed to optimize for how to fund as many locations as possible under NTIA's rules. And those benchmark data, which you will then know, will allow you to calculate what your score could be based on the relationship between the dollars you are requesting in the application and the benchmark. And what you see here in the second bullet point here, this is a direct quote from the initial proposal, volume 2, is that your application and every application will get points out of that total 50 points based on the relationship between the requested BEAD subsidy, that is what you ask for your application, how many dollars you request, as a percentage of the benchmark, and then that percentage converted to a decimal multiplied by 25 and subtracted from total potential points. The formula, by the way, is in the initial proposal, volume 2. So here is an illustration of what that might look like. If your proposed dollar figure is 40% of the benchmark, you get 40 out of the 50 points. And you see the formula here. It's 50, the total number of available points, minus 0.4 times 25, right? That 0.4 being a decimal representation of the 40% of the benchmark equals 40 points. And you can relatively easily do the math on any dollar figure that you might propose in your grant application in order to understand how many of those 50 points you can get. And let me say that again, because I think it is a really big deal. On this criterion, which is the most significant in terms of total points available for scoring of these applications, you will be able to calculate what your points will be in advance of submitting your application. So you are able to understand how many points you will get based on what you are proposing in terms of how many dollars you are asking for in the application. And hopefully that will be very useful in preparing your application and developing your strategy to win. The second criterion of the primary criteria is affordability, and affordability is worth 15 points. Under the federal rules, every state is required to give points for affordability based on the price for a symmetrical gigabit product on a fiber, an end-to-end fiber priority network, right? A priority project, end-to-end fiber, there's a requirement that affordability measure the cost for a symmetrical gigabit product. So Wyoming, like every other state, built a strategy for how to measure the cost of a symmetrical gigabit. And the way that the Wyoming Initial Proposal Volume 2 does this is by to some degree, comparing proposals from all applicants relative to others. The full range of prices submitted by all applicants will be divided into 6 quintiles, and then based on the quintile, points will be assigned, with the first quintile being the lowest price range at 15 points, and the sixth, the highest price range, at 0 points. And you can see there what the distribution is in terms of points. This is not quite as predictable as the last criterion, because here you won't know exactly what other companies throughout the state are proposing, but you have a general sense of how market forces function and what pricing is, and have an opportunity to build your strategy accordingly to try to maximize points if you so wish. Fitting into one of 6 different quintiles, and points ranging from 0 to 15 based on whether you are in the highest price range, the lowest price range, or somewhere in between. So here is an illustration of that. If 12 applications were hypothetically received, and the prices were $60, $60, $70, $75, $80, $80, $90, $100, $120, $150, $190, and $200, and your price were 60, you would get 15 points because you would be in the first quintile. That is the lowest cost quintile. The applicant proposing $200 would get 0 points because they would be in the most expensive quintile. The applicant proposing $150 would receive 3 points because, going back to this, as you can see, they would be in the 5th quintile. So I hope this illustration helps you to understand what this might look like. We don't know what prices will be proposed, but this is a hypothetical illustration of one potential scenario to illustrate what this, how points will be allocated in this case. All right, let's talk about the third primary criterion. This one is fair labor practices. And with respect to fair labor practices, the scoring is based on 2 different things. One is backward-looking, compliance with federal fair labor laws, and documentation of that in the past. And as you'll see in a minute, future-looking commitments to comply with federal fair labor laws. But let's start with this backward-looking item. there is a total of 10 points available for fair labor practices. Of those 10, 4 points will be available based on that backward-looking history. For applicants who have had no violations of federal fair labor laws, as documented in your application and vetted by the state, you will receive these 4 points. Applicants who have had violations will get compared to other applicants. And then there will be a quartile system utilized for this. For those who have the highest total number of violations, they will be within the highest quartile. They will get 0 out of these 4 points. Those in the second quartile will get 1, those in the third, 2, and those in the lowest, 3, right? So those who have had violations of federal labor laws but are in the lowest quartile among all applicants who have had violations will receive 3 points. Hopefully you see the formula there. And then recall, if you've had no documented violations, you can receive the full 4 points here out of the total 10 for fair labor practices. The next slide shows where the other 6 points go, and the other 6 points are forward-looking. This has to do with an applicant making a commitment to adhere to state and federal fair labor laws, and an applicant that makes that commitment will get the 6 points. And the application will make very clear how to make that commitment and how to certify that. For applicants who are new entrants, who have not performed or not been present in the broadband market in the past, NTIA has required that states create a mechanism for them to earn the 10 points through forward-looking commitments, and those new entrants will not be judged on a past history that doesn't exist, but instead will have the opportunity to earn the maximum 10 points by making that forward-looking commitment. All right. I'm just going to go back up to the rubric just so we kind of are grounding ourselves here. What we've talked about so far is minimal BEAD program outlay, affordability, and fair labor practices. In total, that was 75% of all of the scoring, and those were the 3 primary criteria required by NTIA. Now I'm going to talk about the secondary criterion required by NTIA, which is speed to deployment. And then I'm going to talk about 3 additional criteria that the state of Wyoming added. So first, on to speed to deployment. 9 points are available for the speed to deployment criterion. Under the BEAD rules, all applicants have to start service over the network that they build with BEAD dollars within 4 years after getting their grant. And the way these points will be assigned is that one base point will be given to every entity that commits that they will deploy their projects, that they will deploy service in their projects within that 48-month, 4-year timeline. And then there will be additional points available for making commitments that are ahead of that 48-month deadline. And here you see what that formula is so that you will be in a position to know exactly how many points your application will be awarded for speed to deployment based on your timeline. And effectively, it's just 2 points for every 6 months faster than the 4-year deadline that you commit to. And relatively easy here to calculate. I should note something that is very important, which is that commitments made in your application, if you are the awardee for the grant areas for which you apply, those commitments will become enforceable commitments in your grant agreement with the Wyoming Broadband Office. So these are not just aspirational commitments. These are commitments that the state of Wyoming intends to take very seriously. But you can see here that serious commitments made around timeline will allow for points to be allocated in exactly this way. The next criterion is the first of the secondary criteria that was not imposed by NTIA, but was selected by the state of Wyoming, subject to federal approval, which was granted. And that is that the state of Wyoming wants to be sure that unserved eligible locations, that is locations that can't receive 25/3, are prioritized to the greatest degree possible, or put otherwise, that there are points awarded for applicants that commit to a particularly high percentage of unserved locations. So what you see here is the formula for exactly that, again, based on a relative relationship with the other applications. All project areas submitted by applicants will be put into order, and there will then be put into order relative to the ratio of unserved BSLs, broadband serviceable locations, to served broadband serviceable locations in that applicant's project area. And then ranking based on that ratio. Within the quintile that is the lowest, there'll be 1 point, and within the quintile that is the highest, there will be 9 points. So an opportunity to benefit from a considerable number of points based on committing to serving an area where there are a relatively high ratio of unserved broadband serviceable locations relative to served broadband serviceable locations. The next criterion, natural hazard risk mitigation. This seems like a really relevant time to be talking about this, given the extraordinary devastation and destruction we have all seen in the southeast part of the country in the past week. Just the importance of risk mitigation everywhere. We have different kinds of crises in different parts of our country, but this is so critical. 3 points available in Wyoming for natural hazard risk mitigation. The ways that the points will be awarded is that for an application that doesn't include a high-risk census block group, and the definition of that, by the way, is in the initial proposal, volume 2. So we commend you to take a look at that. And this will all be built into the application to make it easy to identify. But for those whose project area doesn't include that, a census block identified as high risk, the 3 points will be available on a pass-fail basis. If the narrative passes, in that it details a convincing case for mitigation of natural hazard risk in building, in both construction and operations of the network, the 3 points are available. For those applicants whose project area does include a high-risk census block group, there will be a request in the application for additional narrative that speak to these 6 dimensions of natural hazard risk mitigation that have been established by NTIA based on the natural hazards that are most common for that part of the country. And those 6 dimensions, as established by NTIA, are detailed here and articulated in more detail in the initial proposal, volume 2. So they include technology platform, retrofitting or hardening, redundant power, existing risk mitigation plans, restoration speed, and network redundancy. These are all relevant, and what the narrative, what the application will ask for is a narrative describing how the network will address each of these things. There'll be a pass-fail, again, pass-fail evaluation of that narrative with 0.5 point available on a pass-fail basis for the response to each of these 6 different dimensions. Sorry, I went in the wrong direction there. So here is an illustration of what that might look like. The applicant has provided a risk mitigation plan. None of their proposed project area has high-risk census block groups. On a pass-fail basis, they can get 3 points. An applicant that does have at least one high-risk census block group must respond in its narrative to all 6 of those different elements that NTIA requires. And in this hypothetical, 3 of those the narrative addresses well, and they pass. Half a point is awarded for each, and that application gets 1.5 points for natural hazard risk mitigation. So between 0 and 3 points available. Okay, the next secondary criterion that was selected by the state, and that is for a demonstration by the applicant of coordination with local and tribal governments. And what the broadband office will do here is analyze how many cities, towns, and tribal governments are located within or partially within the applicant's proposed project area, and then there will be a point available for a letter of support from a municipal or tribal government from the jurisdiction that contains the most broadband serviceable locations within the proposed project area. And then an additional point, up to 3 more, so for a total of up to 4 points, for every 25% of other municipal or tribal governments within the project area who provide a letter of support. So I hope this is clear. There's opportunity to get that first point from the local or tribal government that has effectively the greatest population within your proposed project area. And then another point for each municipal or tribal government that provides a letter of support based on 25% of the remaining governments wholly within or partially within your area. So here is the illustration. An applicant gets a letter of support from let's say, the tribal government, hypothetically, that has the greatest number of broadband serviceable locations in the proposed project area that the applicant has included in its application. So that gets it 1 point. And then in addition, the applicant gets letters of support from 50% of the remaining municipalities in their proposed project area, which gives them another 2 points for a total of 3. If they had gotten letters from all of those municipalities, they could be at a total of 4. So up to 4 points available for letters of coordination and support, local and tribal government. All right, that was that was priority projects, end-to-end fiber. And now I'm going to talk about non-priority projects, which, as you will recall, are the projects that propose a technology that meets NTIA's definition of reliable broadband service. And that definition was in our last webinar and in the deck, as well as the archived recording of that webinar. So meets the definition of reliable broadband service, but is not end-to-end fiber. And this is going to be primarily hybrid fiber coax, licensed fixed wireless, hybrid licensed, unlicensed fixed wireless, and perhaps in certain circumstances, qualifying DSL. And let's look at these the rubric for these non-priority projects. As you can see here, there is an enormous amount of similarity to the one for end-to-end fiber priority projects. Minimal BEAD program outlay, affordability, and fair labor practices are, again, the primary criteria mandated by NTIA with the 50-15-10 assignment of possible points that can be awarded. All of that amounting to 75%, and under NTIA rules had to be at least 75% of the total awards. Then secondary criteria, once again, we have speed to deployment, but now under secondary criteria, we have another mandated criterion, and this one is new. This was not mandated by NTIA for end-to-end fiber. This is speed of network and other technical capabilities. This is mandated by NTIA for non-priority, non-end-to-end fiber applications and must be included here. And what you'll see is that speed to deployment is now 7 points, speed of network and other technical capabilities is 6 points. And then the additional factors are the same as with priority projects. So the unserved BSLs ratio to all BSLs, natural hazard risk mitigation, local and tribal government coordination. But the points have changed a little bit because there have to be points available for this new criterion that we did not have before, speed of network and other technical capabilities. So you see a little bit of tweaking of the points in order to accommodate the fact that there are now 6 points for speed of network and other technical capabilities. That's the overall rubric. Now what I'm going to do is walk you through again these primary criteria, the secondary criteria, particularly speed of network and other technical capabilities, and then the additional criteria, the other secondary criteria that NTIA did not mandate. I know I'm repeating myself, but just important that I note the first 5 criteria here were required by the federal government. There was no discretion whatsoever afforded to states about whether they could include these. These had to be included. Minimal BEAD program outlay, affordability, fair labor practices, speed to deployment, and speed of network and other technical capabilities. And none of the secondary criteria could be given the same number of possible points or a greater number of points than any single primary criterion as mandated by NTIA. So I just wanted you to have that background so you understand the relationship of all of these different elements and where federal rules came into the picture and where the state had more discretion around these 3 last criteria here. Okay, let's jump in. First, minimal BEAD program outlay per project. This is really essentially identical to what we discussed a few minutes ago for end-to-end fiber priority projects. The formula is the same. It is based on the relationship between the proposed cost for the application as proposed by the applicant, the relationship between that and the benchmark price that will be established by the Wyoming Broadband Office and made available to all of you before you put your applications together. And then the formula, which is the relationship between those two, is right here in this illustration, right? So 50 total available points, and then subtracted from that is the percentage of the benchmark of the applicant's proposed cost as expressed as a decimal, multiplied by 25, and then subtracted from that total of 50. So in this illustration, where the applicant proposes that they can build a reliable broadband service network to those project areas for 40% of the benchmark cost that is published by the Wyoming Broadband Office, that applicant gets 40 out of the total 50 possible points. So very formula-based, can be calculated by you before you submit your application so you know exactly how many points you're going to get. Affordability, the second primary criterion. Again, the same framework, the same structure as with priority end-to-end fiber applications. The difference here is that for non-priority projects, reliable broadband service that is not end-to-end fiber, the affordability calculation under NTIA rules is not based on a symmetrical gigabit. It's based on the price proposed for 100 megs down and 20 megs up. So this reflects the fact that reliable broadband service networks that are not end-to-end fiber do not have the same capabilities as an end-to-end fiber network. They are not a priority as end-to-end fiber networks are. And so affordability is calculated based on 100 by 20 instead of based on a symmetrical gig. But the mechanism for awarding points is the same as it was for priority projects. There will be 6 quintiles established based on the proposals and what is the prices proposed in those proposals. And those who are in the lowest quintile will get 15 points. Those in the highest will get 0. And you see the allocation there as among them. Here again is the illustration of what this looks like. If there were hypothetically 12 applications distributed this way with proposed costs for 100 by 20 of these dollars, the applicant that proposed $60 would get 15 points. An applicant who proposed $150 would get 3 points. An applicant that proposed $200 would get 0 points. Based on the quintile mechanism. Once again, identical to for end-to-end fiber projects, except here we're talking about the pricing for 100 by 20 instead of a symmetrical gig, which is what is required for those end-to-end fiber projects. All right, fair labor projects, fair labor practices. The same framework, again, the same points and the same framework for scoring. Out of the 10 possible points, 4 are backward looking. Have there been violations of federal labor laws? If so, how many violations? How do those fit into a quartile framework? And points are then assigned based on that. And then 6 of those points forward-looking for an applicant that makes a commitment that it will adhere to all state and federal fair labor laws, it can get 6 points. And applicants who have no track record because they did not have operations previously can earn the full 10 points by making a forward-looking commitment. All right, secondary criteria. Speed to deployment. This is an NTIA mandated criterion with 7 points assigned here by the Wyoming Broadband Office to this criterion, and the 7 points to be awarded based on the framework you see here. Knowing that the requirement is that service begin within 4 years, after NTIA approves the Broadband Office's final proposal, every applicant can win a base point, a single base point for committing that they will do so within that 4-year period, and then win additional points based on a faster timeline to build, with 2 additional points awarded for every commitment to build 6 months faster than the 4 years, 48-month deadline. And there you see the formula, so you know exactly how many points you can win based on your commitment in your application, which will become an enforceable commitment in your grant agreement, assuming that you are the awardee. So an illustration here, an applicant commits that they will deploy service within 36 months. They will get 5 points. They commit that they'll deploy service within 12 months, they'll get 7 points. An applicant that commits to the 48-month time period gets that 1 base point. All right. This is the big new thing for non-priority projects that did not exist for priority end-to-end fiber projects. This is the biggest single change to the scoring rubric for these other technologies, and that is speed of network and other technical capabilities, for which 6 points, up to 6 points, are evaluated. And what is going to happen here is effectively that the response you provide in your application about the technology you propose to deploy, your network design, and your description of that network design will be evaluated by a subject matter expert selected by the Wyoming Broadband Office. And that expert will evaluate the appropriateness of your proposal for the area you are proposing to build, and whether they think that the design and the technology can accomplish the goals of the program in terms of coverage and capacity and so on. If the expert believes that if the expert assesses that the network design and technology type are weak, there will be a single point awarded. If they assess that what's proposed is exceptional, there will be 6 points awarded, and appropriately in between. So here's some illustrations. An applicant's certified speed and latency requirements demonstrate that there is scalability to a gig down and 35 up. That would be 5 points. 500 by 20 would be 2 points. Less than 500 by 20, scalable, 0 points. That would be around speed. Around life and life cycle for components of the network in excess of 10 years, a point. Does not exceed 10 years, 0 points. You get a sense of how this will be analyzed, and the goal here is to award points based on an applicant demonstrating that the way they will use the BEAD funds will deliver the best possible network for the longest possible period of time, while recognizing that the applicant is not proposing end-to-end fiber, and therefore the network will probably have less capability and will have a shorter life. That is what this recognizes, and NTIA has required that every state and territory have the secondary criterion, speed of network and other technical capabilities, for any application that is not end-to-end fiber. So now the additional secondary criteria that were included by the Wyoming Broadband Office, this is a different number of points, but the same framework and idea as what we discussed for end-to-end fiber applications. And the different number of points, you'll recall, is because there had to be some points assigned to this new criterion we just discussed, speed of network and other technical capabilities. 6 points are assigned there, but that means that there are out of 100 fewer points available for some of these other criteria. So 6 points for unserved broadband serviceable locations. And the Broadband Office is going to calculate that ratio of unserved to served in a project area, and then rank all of the different applications and award points based on position by sextile. Natural hazard risk mitigation, 3 points available now. This will again be a narrative about how the applicant proposes to mitigate natural hazard risk. For applicants who have project areas that do not include a census block group that is identified as high risk, there'll be a pass-fail opportunity to win 3 points. For applicants whose project area does include a high-risk census block group, they'll be asked for additional narrative around NTIA's dimensions of natural hazard risk mitigation. And you see those here, again, technology platform, retrofitting hardening, redundant power, existing risk mitigation plans, restoration speed, and network redundancy. Here, the applicants will be evaluated again on a pass-fail basis with half a point available if for each of these 6 dimensions, half a point for each of the 6 dimensions on which the applicant passes. So an illustration, if your application does not include any high-risk census block groups, you can get 3 points based on a passing narrative. If your application doesn't include at least one high-risk census block group, you can get up to 3 points for half a point for each of the dimensions for which your narrative passes. And then finally, local and tribal government coordination, up to 3 points available, again, based on the same general formula. A single point available for getting a letter of support from the local or tribal government of the jurisdiction that has the most broadband serviceable locations within your application, within the proposed project area for your application. And then an additional half a point, up to 2 total additional points, if you, for each 25% of all the other municipal or tribal governments within your project area who provide a letter of support. So you can maximize for points here based on getting a letter of support from every municipal or tribal government within your project area that would result in the full 3 points. And here is an illustration of what that looks like, of an applicant that gets letters of support from half of the remaining municipalities in the proposed project area. All right. I am going to stop there and turn it back over to Chad and look forward to your questions.
Thanks, Joanne. Um,
Um,
thank you,
Thank you,
Rebecca.
Rebecca.
Oh, can you mute yourself, Joanne? I hear an echo. Awesome. Thank you. Rebecca, thanks for that info. Rebecca just put into the chat where the BEAD information can be found. You can find webinars there, any FAQs, as well as recorded webinars. Does anyone have any questions on anything we went over today? If you have questions, just pop them in the Q&A and we'll take a look at them. I'm not seeing any questions right now. Rebecca, thank you. Rebecca's putting the registration link in the chat window for the upcoming webinars. So if you're interested in joining, please click on there and get registered. But not seeing any questions at this time. I'll give it maybe just another minute or so. Looks like we have one. Macy, I'm not seeing recent recordings or slides posted to the website. When will those be made available? Our IT person, he is out of the office this week. I expect he will have last week's and this week's uploaded when he returns next week. Rebecca, looks like you're responding. Thank you. Any other questions? All right. Well, everyone, really appreciate your time this week. Again, this information can be found on the Wyoming Business Council BEAD landing page. And this recording, along with the deck, you'll be able to find that next week. Once our IT person returns, he'll get this information uploaded. Otherwise, we look forward to seeing you on our next scheduled webinar. I believe that is on Monday, October 7th. That will be over application financial capability. So I look forward to seeing you next week. And thanks again for your time. Have a great day, everyone.